Alright, in this final video about federalism, we're going to be thinking about the question about at what level a decision should be made. We've looked at the history of federalism, we've looked at what the Constitution said, we've looked at some current practices, and sometimes the question emerges, really at what level should we be making this decision? Now this is a very broad question, and sometimes in political science, when we have a question that's very complex, it helps to think about it in terms of a very kind of simple model that can help us to isolate some of the essential features of the issue we're considering. So this model that we're going to be looking at here is called Nationalization as a Road Building Game, and I've adapted it from a textbook by Cornell, Jacobson, and Kauser. These are people on the faculty here at UCSD. And in this model, we have a market road, right, that joins together 4 local roads, okay? And on the local roads are some houses, right? And the houses have people in them who have different views about whether money should be spent to rebuild these roads, okay? And the blue houses are houses that are willing to pay up to 1/3 the cost of road building. And the green houses don't want to spend any money on this stuff, okay? All right, now given that, we can ask a series of questions. Let's first assume that each neighborhood is going to be deciding whether to rebuild its road on its own. So they're going to be deciding about this road, and they'll be deciding about this road, and they'll be deciding about this one, and they'll be deciding about this one. In the first scenario, let's assume that's a system of voluntary cooperation, meaning they're going to get together and talk about it and say, hey, we should rebuild our road, and then they'll just decide together whether to rebuild their road. There's no requirement that anybody participate. In this scenario, how many of the roads will be rebuilt? And remember, the blue houses are willing to pay up to 1/3 of the cost of rebuilding their local road. All right? So in this scenario, this road's going to be rebuilt because there are 3, and they'll each foot 1/3 of the bill, and this one will be rebuilt. This road will not be rebuilt because there were only 2, and they're not willing to pitch in enough money to do it. And this guy's all alone, so that road's not going to be rebuilt. So in this case, we're going to get 2 roads rebuilt. And then in the model, we're going to ask the question, okay, well, how many households are happy with this situation? How many are free riders and how many are disappointed? Now the happy households are going to include the 3 up here that got the road rebuilt, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Also happy are the green houses down here that didn't have to put any, they didn't care one way or another. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. But we also want to include in this happy category these 2 up here because they got a road rebuilt without having to pitch in at all. So that means we have 13 happy households. A lot of happy households with that arrangement. How many free riders? Well, these 2 are free riders, right? They got road built without having to pitch in. And we have 3 disappointed households. These blue ones down here. Now let's shift the model and assume that instead of voluntary cooperation, we're going to shift to a situation of majority rule and taxation. So they're going to take a vote. They've set up a government, and they're going to take a vote, and they're going to decide whether to rebuild the road, and then if they decide to rebuild the road, then they'll tax themselves. All right? So under this scenario, how many houses are going to be rebuilt? Because now it's majority rule. How many of the roads? Well, we're going to get the same 2 roads built. These 2 roads are going to be rebuilt because there are 3 and 3 here that are going to outvote these. And these won't be rebuilt because they're in the majority, the ones that don't want to rebuild the roads. Right? Okay, well, how many happy households are there? Well, these 3 are happy, and these 3 are happy, and these 2 are happy, and these 3 are happy. Right? What's different when we move from the first scenario to the second scenario is that the free riders disappear. Right? So they move from the happy category to the disappointed category. Right? Because now we have in the disappointed category these 3 houses down here, 3 and 4, 5. Now they're disappointed because they're going to have to pay taxes on this. They're going to split it, instead of splitting it 3 ways, they're going to split it 4 ways. And so the big difference between this first step and the second is taxation. And that's what taxation's all about, getting rid of the free riders. Other than that, everything's pretty much the same. All right, now let's shift our model so that instead of making one decision at each road level, we're going to make one decision all together about all 4 roads at the same time. And everybody, all 16 houses, are going to participate in the vote, and then they'll decide all at once whether to rebuild the roads. So in this scenario, how many roads are going to be rebuilt? Well, in this scenario, you're just going to count the blues, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, versus the greens, 9 and 7. Yes? And so the roads get rebuilt, so that means all 4 roads are going to be rebuilt. And we have 9 happy households, all the blue ones, and all the green ones are disappointed because now all of them are going to have to pitch in and be taxed to build the roads. Now, the question that I want you to consider is, what level should this decision be made at? And why? Well, one could certainly say that, well, I like roads being rebuilt. More roads are always better, so it should be made at the higher level. But this is certainly not the case. People on this A street never use the street down here in our model. They never use that road. So their happiness is not at all increased by rebuilding this road, right? What in fact happens is that their happiness goes down, these 2 houses, for no particular reason. Yeah? And so probably the best answer would be that this decision should be made at the local level. You can even you can look at this just by counting the number of happy households. From shifting from a local level to a higher level decision, you've reduced the number of happy households, and you've increased the number of disappointed households for no particular reason. All right. Now let's change it up a little bit. And now we're going to focus on the market road. Okay. And let's also change the way that we're thinking about this, from thinking of these as neighborhoods to thinking of them as states. All right. So that we can kind of focus in on this question about federalism in our system. So these are states. We have 4 states, and this market road is the national highway system. Now, the first scenario we're going to consider is that in building the highway system, each segment of the road has to be built by the people in the locality, or let's say the state, where it's going to run. Okay? And we're going to use the same understanding. The green houses are not particularly interested in building this highway system and pitching in for it, and the blue houses are. All right, so let's first assume that we're going to have each segment made that way, and the question is, will the highway system be completed, right? And the answer, of course, is no. It's not going to be completed. Half of it will be completed, but the other half will not. It'll be sort of like if you were, driving up to Los Angeles, and in Orange County you had to get off the freeway and drive all the side roads for a while, and then you can get back on when you get up to LA. It's not going to be serviceable as a functioning highway system. So under this scenario, then, we have to count how many households are happy, right? Now, to count the happy households, certainly we're going to include these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're happy because that section of the road was not built. They didn't pitch in money for it, and they didn't want to do that anyway. So they're happy. But is anybody up here happy? That's the question. Is anybody up here happy at all? And the answer is no. The blue houses are not happy because they pitched in and they built their section of the road, but they don't have a complete highway system, and they want to drive in this direction to take their goods to market, and they have to get off and use the local roads. So they don't like that. And 1 and 6 are certainly not happy because they weren't interested in pitching in, and they were forced to, right? So in this scenario, we end up with only 5 happy households and 11 that are disappointed. Everybody up here is disappointed. All of these are disappointed, and 3 disappointed households down here. So 11 disappointed. Okay, so let's shift that then, and let's say there's going to be one joint decision to build the entire highway system, and it's going to include all 16 households in all 4 states. All right. Now, under that scenario, of course, is it going to be fully built? And the answer is yes, it is going to be fully built. So how does that shift the number of happy and the number of disappointed? Well, to count the happy households, we're just going to count the blue versus the green, right? So we're shifting back to the scenario on the last page. It's basically green versus blue. So the blues are 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, of course, and 7 disappointed. All right. Now, the question, under this scenario, sorry, I meant to actually scratch all of this off. This shouldn't be here. Let's move down here. The question is, at what level should the decision about the market road or the national highway system be made? And certainly if you're counting happy households, one would say that it should be made at the federal level. There should be one joint national decision because you've increased the number of happy households. Another way to think about it is that when these households down here decide that they're not going to participate in building, it does affect them. It has a lot of effect on the houses up here. So the effects cross state lines and shift the way that we might think about at what level this decision should be made. All right. One last scenario here. And in this scenario, we're going to think about think about the question not about market roads or local roads, but about whether states can require their schools to be segregated by race. All right, so we're shifting entirely what the issue is, but we want to still focus on at what level this decision should be made. Now, under this scenario, we're going to have to think about what the blue houses and the green houses signify. Let's say that the blue houses do not want schools to be segregated by race. They're not going to require that, okay? The green houses do want their schools segregated by race, all right? Now, on the first scenario, let's say that we're going to make this decision state by state. We're going to allow each state to decide whether to segregate their schools by race. And of course, in that scenario, we're going to end up with 2 states that have schools segregated by race. These 2 down here are going to be segregated. And we're going to have 2 schools that are not going to require their schools to be segregated by race. These are the states up here, right? Now, under that scenario, how many happy households are there, and how many disappointed households? Well, we're going to do the same thing we did in the last model with the local roads, right? And to the extent that the decision is made this way, we're going to end up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 happy households, right? We end up with 11 happy households and 5 disappointed households. And of course, the disappointed households are the households that wanted schools not to be segregated down here, so 9, 10, and 14, and 1 and 6 who did want the schools to be segregated by race up here, right? So 5 disappointed. All right, so let's shift it again. Let's make one decision for the entire country about whether schools should be segregated by race, or whether they're going to be required to be segregated by race. And when we do it that way, of course, we end up with 0 that are going to require schools to be segregated by race, and 4 that are not going to require schools to be segregated by race, right? So all 4 are not going to be segregated by race. And then we want to count the happy and disappointed, like we did before. And the happy households are the ones that are colored blue, right? So 9 and 7, okay? And so the question then is, at what level should this decision be made, and why? Now remember, when we were talking about local roads, we decided that kind of decision should be made at the local level, yeah? And if you count the number of happy and disappointed households, it seems like making this decision at the local level would be the better answer, and so that you would end up with 2 states that have their schools segregated by race. But probably most of you right now are thinking, of course we're not going to have this decision be made at the local or state level. We're going to have it be made at the federal level. But then I have to ask you why. What's different about this issue than about building local roads? What makes this issue different that would make you want to insist that the decision be made at the national level? Well, you might say, for instance, that this is a different kind of an issue. It's a different kind of an issue in that it is a moral question. Now, you could make the argument that, well, if these schools down here are segregated by race, it's going to, produce a less educated workforce, and eventually that'll affect people up here. But that's, in that case, you'd be making this kind of argument about the effect of segregated schools. But most people thinking about this kind of question wouldn't even ask wouldn't even go there. They would just say, of course we're not going to segregate schools by race. We just don't do that. And it doesn't matter how many happy or how many disappointed households there are. We just don't do that as a matter of morality. So what this model helps us think about is that sometimes when we're making decisions about at what level a decision should be made, there are 3 different kinds of issues. One might say we have local issues, those issues that the effects of which do not reach outside of the local community or the state, and so those decisions really should be made at the local level. Maximizing democracy has its own benefits. The second kind of an issue is a market road type of issue, right? And that's an issue with effects that reach across state lines, like the interstate highway system. And if one state decides to do something a certain way or to not participate in a decision, it's going to affect people in the other state. And so there's a lot of pressure to shift those decisions up to a national level. And the third kind of an issue, moral questions. And we, especially since the 1960s, we have tended to take moral issues up to the national level to ensure that we get a national decision about these things. All right, well, I hope that's helped to clarify a little bit for you.